not do the basic that he can do? When it comes to embezzlement, seemingly the hands are not tied.
Yeah, I've heard this particular analysis a lot of people have made, and that's where we are. I think that if we succeed in creating a foundation of understanding that explains this to the African people, I think we'll be able to achieve what we are struggling to achieve in Africa. You see, when you tie a goat, the area where the goat is tied, there's enough food supply because you need the goat to stay alive, and that is why they can embezzle. That's why they can prosper as individuals. That's why the economy is always in the hands of the few people. Those are the people who are tied. So they must be tied around where food supply is. That's why even in our own local community, when you go to tie a goat, you always tie the goat where there is food. So the goat needs to eat while being tied. So the aspect of their hands not being tied, at the area of where they are kept, they have sufficiency. Now when it comes down to the population, there is something that Africans need to understand, why these resources do not need to get down to the majority. Because when it gets down to the majority, because there's a game here, and this game has to do with, that's where we talk about, for example, neo-colonial rule, which is an indirect rule of the imperialists over the majority of the people using the governments of Africa. Now, when I talk about the structural adjustment policy, this is how it goes. Take, for example, it will surprise a lot of Cameroonians that there is an existing treaty between Cameroon government and France, which states that the hospital that Biya has built in Swiss should not be built in Cameroon.
But there have not been documents to prove that.
No.
Legal documents.
Permit me to say that. That's why I had some questions with some other analysts who were asking that, but why are these colonial treaties, pacts, not discussed in our parliament? They are not meant to discuss in the parliament.
But the government says there's none.
No, that's what I'm trying to say. The government is not a government which you invested in. It's not a government where you voted. It was a government that was instituted not by the Cameroonians themselves, but are claim to be representing the Cameroonians, but are in more of collaboration with the West.
We have ambassadors as leaders.
Well, I may almost say that we have almost like not really ambassadors, but we have employees that are on the behalf, managing the country on the behalf of another person. As a matter of fact, Doc, you were on the last meeting together with Dr. Sinkala in is it Uganda or South Africa or so? It was in Afrique Media. We were made as well to understand that at the Berlin conference, the sales of Africa was even dated with certain figures, and those that bought Africa, those that to whom Africa was sold. That's why in the period of the independence in Africa, it's different when you fight for your rights. It's different when you gain your sovereignty, and it's different when somebody gives it to you. In that process of you negotiating to become independent, that is where the strings are attached. And do you also know that when the World Bank or the IMF gives you loan, apart from the high interest which you get, they give you with certain conditions. They tell you that, okay, we don't want you to do this, we don't want you to do that. Those conditions need to be met in order for you to get this loan. So when the African nation got independence, they were already indebted. They made it in such a way that you must borrow in order to start your nation, because they keep you at the point where you have to pay what they call the colonial tax. A sufficient amount of your own country's resources is being held by an individual, which says that, okay, I only allow you to have this small percentage, which the small percentage does not go through in the population which you have in your country in terms to improve the life standard of your people. So that is when now you are now left with the IMF and the World Bank, where you now go there for loan. Like we have the WHO, which is managing on the behalf of all the member states at the level of the United Nations, and so the World Bank. So you now go there and they begin to give you now these loans with conditions. And these are the conditions that ends up to affect our governments and the functionalities of our state, and then begin to change the mentality of the people, whereby we now today we begin to ask ourselves, but why can the government not do this? Why can the government not do this? As a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to talk with one political analyst in Jamaica. He was explaining how they did in Jamaica and how they did in Africa, using what they call the structural adjustment policies, where there are certain things where those things are not in our law. If you go in our law, they are not there. But this is just between you and the imperialists. So there are things whereby you cannot do in Cameroon. As far as France is concerned, knowing that it is France that has the trusteeship over Cameroon. You don't have right to do certain things, but this is not made known to the Cameroonian. It's not discussed in our parliament. So we only realize how the country is going the way it's going, and we ask ourselves, but why can the government is not able to do this? This is what I'm trying to explain to you, that Mr. Tamar Jarvis, that the goodwill is there, but the strings which are attached are meant to keep the 85% of its population.
Is it that these people holding this issue, is it because of this colonial treaties and the structural adjustment plan that's still making them to do this?
No, you cannot take all the blame and put on one side. Every person has his own chain of responsibility, but we are talking about the principal effect of a nation.
Yes.
Now, when it comes down to the particular individuals, you realize that the way the colonialists function in terms of managing or dealing or in their cooperations with governments in Africa, they only look for greedy people. They only look for people, that is a simple truth. They look for people who are going to dance their dance. They don't look for people who are going to go against them. And that's what we saw with Gbagbo in 2010 when he went against France. That's what we saw with Idriss Déby. That's what we saw with Magufuli. That's what we saw with the president of Madagascar, Uganda. So when you don't dance their dance, they find a way to resist you, they find a way to eliminate you. So at times, and that is the essence of why they keep creating the political parties, like we are hearing today of how many political parties have been